Hello and welcome to a new video. In this video I want to share with you one of my most recent games where I played an international master with the black pieces. And the game started out with the Sicilian Four Knights, one of my favorite openings. White plays d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, threatening the pawn on e4. White can never play e5 at this stage because this would run into queen a5 check, picking up the pawn on e5. So white continued with the normal knight c3, I went knight c6, and white went for one of the most principal lines, taking on c6 and then pushing e5. Now there is no longer queen a5 because it is not check. Black needs to go to d5 with the knight, and white goes to e4. Now the ideas are often connected with jumping to d6 at the right moment, and also with c4 hitting my knight, arguing that it has not so many great squares. The main line here is something like queen c7. White needs to protect the e5 pawn. Black then goes queen b6, having a look at the e3 square and the b2 pawn, and then white goes for some crazy lines, sometimes with c4, bishop b4 check, and king e2. I was not particularly interested in going for this, so I chose a sideline with bishop b7 here, setting a small threat that white could run into this trap. c4 is a mistake here, even though it looks very good, hitting my knight twice, but there is queen a5, very strong response. White cannot take because the rook would drop, but at the same time e5 is attacked and white is losing a pawn. Position is still complicated, but usually white should not go for this. My opponent probably knew this and instead played bishop e2, after which I played a quite new move, queen a5 check, forcing c3 more or less, and after c5 castles, intending queen c7, having provoked this move, which might be a bit annoying when white wants to put the bishop on the long diagonal. However, my opponent quite surprised me by playing king to f1, not wanting to play pawn to c3, and I decided to go c5 anyway. At this point, he should have played c4, hitting my knight, and I should have gone something like knight b4. In the game I was not sure about this and also considered knight e3, bishop e3, bishop e4, and after bishop e3 I intended to take and play rook b8, thinking I was kind of okay. Still, white is a bit pushing here and things are not that easy, especially since after b3 I can never really take on b3 because this would allow queen a8 check, which is a big problem. So this all didn't happen in the game because my opponent decided to play knight d6 instead. Giving this check, I must of course give the bishop, not to lose the other bishop. And after c takes d6, we came to a very critical moment. Now the question is if I should just continue castling, which is objectively the best move, or if I should play c4, a positional pawn sacrifice, which I decided to go for in the game. The idea is that white cannot play c4 himself, and if he ever takes on c4 I get very quick development. White is no longer having the pair of bishops and I have a lot of counterplay, sometimes regaining the pawn on d6, sometimes just playing along the c file. In the game my opponent decided not to take there immediately but play queen d4 first, hitting my g7 pawn and also the c4 pawn. I had considered this previously and decided to castle when he finally took on c4 and I played bishop a6, but here he made a big mistake playing b3, after which I could disrupt his pawn structure because queen takes c4 is pretty bad because I can follow up with rook c8 and then either win the pawn here or put so much pressure that I would win the pawn in the long run, but probably the pawn is just lost immediately because after any retreat I will have at least queen c3 and then taking here, but maybe even stronger things like knight c3. However, he felt that he must take with the pawn, but now black is just a single pawn down, but it's pretty clear that one of those pawns will be weak and finally fall. We mustn't forget that the white king is in big trouble as well. I played knight b6, threatening something like queen a6, and the pinned pawn would be lost. My opponent decided to play bishop b2, threatening mate on g7, but I can defend with f6. Now the long diagonal is pretty blocked, and I'm ready to win the pawn in the next move. So he decided to go c5 immediately. I decided to go knight a4, bishop a3, and now my initial intention was to go rook c8 and just picking up the pawn. But after looking for a while, I found another idea, which I already showed on the short video. Knight c3, hitting the bishop, and also having some ideas of checkmating the white king. My opponent went to c1. He couldn't go to b2 because queen b5 would win the bishop. He couldn't go bishop b4 because, again, queen b5 would win the bishop. Queen d3 is forced. Otherwise he's checkmated with this beautiful smothered mate. King goes here, queen, knight g3, king here, king e1 is also answered by mate on e2. And if king g1, then there would be queen f1, rook takes, knight e2. So that's why after this check, queen d3 would be forced, but then sadly for white, the bishop drops anyway. So this is all not possible, also not queen b4 because of queen a6, again with those smothered mate ideas. So my opponent decided to continue more tenaciously with bishop to c1. And after bishop c1, I could have gone for something very beautiful, but I did not go for it. Rook c8 was best. Bishop here, and then takes anyway. White cannot take again because this would lead to checkmate very, very soon. I did not see this, and I was extremely happy with my move also because after queen b5, white must play queen d3, and then I regained the pawn while having a lot of positional pluses here. From now the game was more technical, and I will go through quickly. My opponent played bishop e3, I went queen c6, stabilizing on the light squares, h4, rook c8, getting ready for some queen trades because the endgame is very good due to the weak d6 pawn. He played rook h3, queen c4, h5, a6, improving slightly, and after bishop d2, I went for knight to e4, bishop e1, took, rook takes c2, already a pawn up, now preventing the counterplay. There is no rook b7 due to knight to c5, forking the rooks, and after knight comes to c5, there is no rook b7 anyway. So my opponent tried to get in on b6, but my knight is pretty stable. I played e5, trying to activate my last piece. The king comes to e6 now, and thus also the d7 pawn gets quite stabilized. Black is winning here, and after king f7, f3, king e6, he played bishop f2, which finally allowed me to take a2 without being scared of this pin along the c file, because after rook c1 there would be rook takes f2 check now, because after king takes there is knight d3, winning back the rook and being a knight up. That's why my opponent decided to take on c5 with the bishop. I took with the rook, rook b8. Now I decided to activate my king first, after which I was soon ready to come to the second rank with my rooks, and the rooks are fully dominating. White is extremely passive, and he was just hoping for one last trick that I would go for rook d2, after which he would even win the game with g4 check, but I of course did not fall for this one, and instead played king e6 back, sidestepping all discovered attacks, and my opponent resigned the game. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one. Goodbye.